Welcome back to Applied Sciences, Episode 5. This week we're going to go over the process of silicone molding for the Batman Arkham Knight chest armor and torso armor that I went over last week. Last week we went over the prep to get the model ready for silicone molding, and as you can see here, I've got the cardboard still left around from that process. That I put on early because that was actually meant for this step so that the silicone has something to drip onto. For this process, I'll be using a product from Smooth-On, a fairly well-known company in the silicone casting world, and just urethane casting, any sort of casting, they have products that cover it. I'm using their Rebound 25 Platinum silicone for this. It's a brushable silicone. It helps capture more detail, and if I was painting, or not painting, but if I was brushing this onto a more rigid structure, it would adhere better because it's a thicker silicone rather than just a straight, more watery silicone as you're preparing it for your model. What I like best about this product is that it's a 1-to-1 ratio mix. So essentially, I have my 3 clear plastic cups. I put part A into 1 cup, and I put an equal amount of part B. All you have to do is match them up because they're matched up by volume or weight. So for this, I can just eyeball it as best as I can, and it won't affect the mix ratio at all for me. So it's easier than having to pull out the scale, measure it out like you have to do with some urethanes and some resins. Very easy, simple. Then you just mix it really well till you can't see either color separately, and they become a nice light orange. Now the first layer for any piece that you're silicone molding, for this piece in particular as well, what you first do is what's called a beauty coat. And what I'm doing here is brushing it in very carefully, very thin first layer, into all the crevices, all the details, making sure the silicone gets in there, because I want all those details pulled, all the little lines. So for the first couple layers here, all I'll do really is brush it in. It takes a while it takes about 25 minutes in between layers. Working with this in around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, a nice even temperature. There aren't a whole lot of fumes with silicone. With urethane and other resins and your casting materials, what you'll put inside this mold, there will be, and you won't have that sort of option. But with silicone, you can do it inside because you need the temperature to be at a very specific temperature. But I had the time to do these, so 20 minutes in between each layer. The first layer was very thin, just a simple beauty coat, so I let that sit for only about 15 minutes and then came back and did this second coat here. And again, I'm just brushing it in, getting all the little details before I put on the last couple of coats that just thicken it up and make it a full mold for me. For the last couple layers of this mold, you do about typically 4 to 5 layers depending on your mold. For this one, I did 4.5-ish, based on what I had left for silicone. I saved some of it to work on a separate mold. For this, I did the 4 layers. But for the last couple layers, what you do typically is get a thixotropic agent like this Thivex here. And what that does is it raises the viscosity of your silicone to a point where it's almost like a peanut butter paste-like consistency. It just thickens it up. It saves you material so that you can make a thicker coat of your layer there to really beef up your mold and make it more rigid and not waste as much time. Otherwise, you'd have to do an extra 3 to 4 layers, 20 minutes a piece in between to let them cure and let them set a little bit. So it saves a lot of time, and it works fantastic. That little bottle will last for the next 4 or 5 molds for me, and it was only like $7 or something on Amazon. So I do about 2 coats of the new thickened layers here with the Thivex in it. Those just go on simple. I can't really brush those on as well, so those kind of get poured on and just kind of lathered on as best as I can, almost like frosting really to a cake. Those just go down, and then really the only next step is creating the mother mold. But you have to let this fully cure before you do anything with a plaster mold. Some people use different materials for their mother molds. Plaster isn't necessarily the go-to. It's definitely the cheapest I've found, and I haven't found any issues with it. Some people use a different material. Smooth-On sells like an air morph type clay, which is very, very light material that holds up. It's similar to plaster, but it sets up almost like Crayola's air puff dough clay stuff that they have. You can see the new thickened layers are down. You can't see any of the original model, save for in a few spots, but it's definitely thick enough that I don't have to do anything else with it. And here I'm just making my own plaster bandages, mixing my own plaster, because I needed gauze for another costume, and I originally set out to buy actual plaster bandages, but messed up the order, and it just worked out having a ton of gauze and plaster. It was just a lot cheaper to make my own, and gave me a pretty decent rigid cast for my silicone mold here, and it'll hold it up pretty nice for the first casting, which you will see in next week's episode